Hey guys, what's up? Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/eggs show. That's EGGSSHOW. Audible has more than 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or just about any device you can imagine. As Eggs listeners, you can download a free audiobook today by visiting audibletrial.com/eggs show.
Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. And cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right on the jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just a perfect day. It's just a perfect day. Na, 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 na,
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to another exciting edition of Eggs. This week's guest is Benni Huang. Benni is a woman of many hats. She runs a design agency, creative agency. Her website is beii.tv. And she's basically an animator, art director, graphic designer, copywriter, just anything you could need, all person to all things. She's worked for a million amazing clients, including National Geographic, IBM, Al Jazeera, Starbucks, MasterCard, a million more, WeWork, who we were actually just talking about moments ago, and many other things. And so Benni reached out to our show and had some interest in coming on. We think she's a perfect fit. So without any further ado, here she is. Hey, Benni, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you guys?
So good.
So I heard that we're your first podcast.
Yes, you guys are my first podcast.
Thank you for coming on and being a part of our show. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for
for
having
anybody
me.
watching the live stream, you'll notice things look a little different. So that's our fault. So Benni's first podcast, and we screwed up royal on the technology side. So our view looks a little bit different, but that's all right. We should sound right.
Well, let's clarify that just so why it's different. Google Hangouts switched their platform, and so
Yeah,
what
YouTube
we have
did.
been
YouTube.
using...
Yeah.
YouTube did?
Yeah, YouTube switched up their relationship with Google Hangouts on Air, which is normally how we talk to our clients, and that, or not our clients, but our guests, and that turned into kind of a pickle today. Apparently they discontinued on September 1st, so anybody we've told to use that platform, knock it off.
Yeah, right?
So anyway, well, Benni, let's get right into it. Let's talk about you a little bit. Where are you from?
I grew up in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. So I moved to Australia, my family and I moved to Australia when I was 5.5. So I grew up in Australia and I lived there until I was 21, after which I moved to New York. And so all my life I had drawn. I was like, my earliest memory is of me in first grade, and we were sitting on the floor, and I was surrounded by my classmates, and I was looking at the back of this boy's head, and he was wearing this blue Nike baseball cap, and he had, the hole in the back of the cap, and he had these blonde hairs kind of coming out, and I was like obsessed with that vision, and I just kind of ran home after school and would draw this vision over and over and over again. And so over the many years, I've sort of become a self-taught, illustrator, animator, whatnot.
So everything you've done is self-taught?
Yeah.
Wow. That's
and
impressive.
that's, I don't think that's horribly uncommon among creative people. I mean, unfortunately, the level of education you could get at like a classic, university. I'm not sure, Benni, if you went to like a normal university or anything, but the type of education, or at least was my experience in college, couldn't keep up with my level at the time. And so, I had self-taught as well. And so I spent a lot of time learning all this software on my own, much more than people who were just going to college to learn it. Like I'd already been doing this for some time by the time I got to college. And so we had a really hard time, or it was, basically impossible for sort of a standard education program to stay caught up with the really advanced kids. So I don't know if that was your experience, Benny, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a Bachelor of Arts with a major in media arts and production. And so a lot of my friends ended up, being directors or producers or assistant directors and camera operators. But I remember a lot of it being very theory heavy, so we would go to these classes, but it would be a lot of reading, a lot of lectures and a lot of essays and very little to do with the practical side of using any of these tools. And I had sort of this extra layer of, I'd grown up drawing and what I was good at by then was drawing. And here I was in this course where I was taught how to create short films and create feature films and write feature films. But I thought, well, I can draw. So why don't I try to sort of combine those two? And I remember it being quite a difficult process because there wasn't a lot of support for the practical side of what I wanted to do. And so I had to, like you, kind of go out and find tools on my own. And, this wasn't that long ago, but I think the landscape today is improved because at least people have this alternative of, going on YouTube or going onto, any number of resources where they can learn about these software kind of on their own and outside of just being stuck having to learn this stuff on a campus.
Well, yeah, it's so true. I mean, there's, just like doing this podcast, right? I mean, the ability for anybody to get out there and publish anything is much better now than it's ever been. And so for artists and people who come up, trying to draw or whatever, and they're looking for their fit, you've got these platforms like Behance and Dribbble and places like this where you can showcase your work and be discovered, for the thing you're good at. And then for people like you who can sort of merge that into more than one thing, it seems like that's kind of where the next level happens. That's when you start doing the work for the WeWorks and the things like that is, you are crafting your practical ability to do illustration and combining it with the things they need, the video production or the animation, whatever it is, commercial art.
Can you talk about your first client, like first paying gig, how that went down, what you learned, what you took from it?
Yeah. So when I first moved to New York, I had never been in the States and I had this 1-year work visa. So after you graduate within a year in Australia, you can get this special work visa called the J1 visa. I'm not sure if they still do it now, but I had this opportunity to be on the visa and I could travel to America and work for a year. And so I came to New York and, I had no idea that there were boroughs. I just thought, well, there's like New York, and I didn't know like any of the places that I should live, but the only place that I did know was Times Square, and so I actually spent my first week in New York living in a hotel in Times Square. So that was a lot of fun, and so it took me a while to actually get my first job. I started out as a full-time illustrator and animator at a small studio in Brooklyn. And I found it really difficult to find the job because I realized that, I had made these short films and some of them had won some decent awards. And I thought, well, I've made it. I've been having no trouble in New York City, here I come. And I just got this slap in the face because I realized that I didn't have any of the tools or the skills that could make businesses money, right? They weren't looking to me to be like, wow, you're a creative person, I'm going to hire you to make me short films. They were looking to me as, well, how can I best use you in my business in order for me to solve my problems and make me more money?
Yeah, no, I think that's a real challenge for a lot of people who are artists, specifically people, like you who've been able to draw. Making that transition into commercial art is always a transition. And it's a totally different mindset. As a person who draws growing up, I did the same. We drew for the sake of drawing because we enjoyed it. It was fun and it was a thing that we could just do. And we want people to appreciate us for what we do and that we can, look at us, we can draw. But yeah, until you can tie it to some sort of function of business, like no business is going to employ you for just making cool drawings.
Exactly. And that's a really hard lesson to learn. And I'm kind of surprised that, all throughout university, no one really mentioned that. Like no one really sat us down and was like, look, this is the reality. Like all this cool stuff that you're making, like you're not really going to be able to capitalize on it or sort of make strides on it until kind of later in your career, where you sort of come back full circle, right? But you have to also then, when you leave university, you're sort of out of the cocoon where you're into the world where you have to be useful to businesses, to companies in a financial sense, and not just kind of in a purely creative sense. And so, I was very fortunate to be able to actually get work at this small studio. And what we ended up doing was it's a studio called Whiteboard Animation Studio. And I don't know if you guys have seen, but on YouTube, it's become like this big cult thing, I guess. It's like you'd see like this hairy man hand.
Yeah. Like the hand that just draws like on the whiteboard or whatever.
Yeah, it draws on the whiteboard and like they're doodling away, and someone's giving a presentation. Yeah, maybe it's a little dry, maybe it's a little dense, and so this kind of makes it visually engaging. And so we were a studio which exclusively did those doodles.
Really? Yeah, I remember those were the hottest thing for like a little while.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, it's still going pretty strong. And so I kind of was in that studio, and I worked there for I think like 3 years or 2.5 years.
So do you just have like a hairy hand that you put on while you draw?
Well, giving away some industry secrets here, but some of the stuff we would actually have like a camera overhead, and we would shoot downwards and we would draw. But a lot of the work was like a comped hand, so we would get someone in our studio who had a nice looking hand and we would kind of comp it, drawing on all this stuff. So that was really cool. And it was it was a good experience for me because I actually learned all the tools that I now use on a daily basis from that job and on that job. Yeah. I actually had no idea how to use After Effects, on my first day of work. I just kind of had to learn it on the fly.
Well, that was a challenging thing to learn on the fly. After Effects is not the easiest program. Absolutely.
It was very difficult, but I think it was, being in that environment where you're using it day in and day out, and you had to, and there was like a clear purpose to why you were using it, actually made it really a lot easier to learn, because these programs there's just like a billion things that you could do with them, and
without any
I think
focus, it's difficult because you could literally do anything in there. So it's
exactly
hard to learn it if you're just learning it for the sake of it. But if you're trying to build a project, for example, it seems to be a little bit easier.
Did you have a coworker that was really good at it and you were able to kind of lean on, or is it straight up YouTube videos, just learning wherever and whenever you can, kind of thing?
It was a mix. I think I probably started with some YouTube videos just as background, so that I was familiar with all the panels, all the open panels, and kind of what each of them did. And then I had a coworker who, she was a terrific animator. Her name is Colleen, and she had been working at the studio for a while by then, and she would kind of look over and I would ask her questions. And it was very, very valuable to have someone who, I could just kind of ask whenever I was stuck. So I worked there for quite a while, and then I decided that I wanted to switch gears. I wanted to do freelance, and so I had a kind of added layer of difficulty because I'm from Australia, and my boss had sponsored me to work in the States, and I wanted to transition kind of out of that job into freelance, where I wanted to work on a variety of work. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of difficult because that meant that I had to move on to a separate visa, which is called the O1 visa. And that's a specific visa for artists and performers and whatnot. And basically that allows you to freelance and allows you to work for multiple employers and not be stuck with one. And so at first I had to kind of go through this process of getting that visa and transitioning from the visa that I was on at the studio to this new visa before I could start freelancing. And so that all happened. and it was a lot of work, and it's a lot of money. So it's tough to, stay in the States. And I remember like some of my coworkers would be like, oh, it's like so hard. Like I hate this job. And I would be like, desperately trying to like get all my paperwork together because I wanted to like stay in New York, So yeah, it was.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about that switch to freelance. I've known a lot of people who've worked in agency and things like that, and eventually they just kind of get tired of it, either the accounts or whatever. I mean, there's a myriad of reasons people leave agency. But I've noticed more and more lately, especially because our agency works with a gazillion freelancers, because that's sort of where I came from too. I'm noticing more and more of them sort of kind of quitting agency for good and going freelance. Like this is the choice they're making, is to leave and go freelance and sort of give up the stability of a full-time job. I guess let's talk a little bit about like what I guess actually pushed you into making that decision, and then how did it go? How did you prepare? Because like going from the land of the steady paycheck to the land of, well, maybe
Desert,
I'll get paid.
Maybe the client will pay me this month.
Is a little bit of a transition. I mean, a lot of us, are fortunate enough to leave agency or leave prior employers with maybe a contract or two. But I'm curious about your experience.
So the reason that I wanted to change was because, well, a couple of reasons. One was that the work was, it was simple. Like by the time I had learned After Effects and learned what I needed from After Effects to achieve the looks and the particular style that we did it as a studio, I began to realize that, if I'm looking forward 1 year or 2 years, if I ever want to leave, like this skill is not really going to translate to any other animated work. And so that was kind of a red flag for me. And
just
secondly,
the sketch style, the style of that studio in particular. Okay, so
right.
The animation that you're learning, the After Effects stuff you're learning can be used, but that style is more stuck for that studio.
Well, it happens a lot. Like, so for example, I worked at an ad agency whose bread and butter were healthcare clients. So you spend a lot of time working in healthcare. Well, you're going to have a heck of a time getting a job in automotive or in tourism or in whatever other industry, if you don't have some breadth of expertise. If you spend too much time doing stuff that all looks the same, I guess you're sort of not scratching that creative itch. You're not growing as an artist or growing as a designer. So it is important. And this is actually why a lot of designers jump around, every couple, 2-3 years, is to get new, fresh work.
Game developers do the same thing.
Yeah.
They just like a change of pace. So that was your driving force mainly, was just you wanted to get more experience doing other things where you're more well-rounded?
Yeah, that was I would say one of the strongest driving forces. And also I think what you mentioned earlier, this I think for creative people, this is the big 5 personality scale. And one of them is the trait of openness, which is openness to experience and openness to different kinds of aesthetics. And I think if you're a creative, then you're someone who scores extremely high on openness, meaning that, you're constantly chasing after novelty, or, my experience is like, I'll watch a movie, any kind of movie, and they'll be like a dancer, and then I'll think, oh, maybe I should dance, or like, it'll be like a guitarist, and I'll be like, yeah, like I too want to learn lead guitar. Which I've been trying to do, by the way. But
yeah, no, I'm exactly the same.
I was just going to say that. I'm like, Ryan is like the exact same person.
Yeah, I'm working on like 3 different startup companies right now. Like, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's sort of like this intrinsic like impetus that you have to change. Otherwise, something in you is just going to wither. And
as sort of a young designer, though, why freelance versus going to another agency or finding work, in-house someplace or whatever else? Why the option to just go freelance?
I think I thought about this a lot because, growing up, whenever I would mention to people like, oh, I animate or I illustrate, people would be like, oh, do you work at Disney? Like, do you want to work at Pixar? And I would always say like, no,
I enjoy my life.
Yeah, like not really. And, for a long time, I was kind of concerned. I thought, well, maybe I'm just lazy. Like maybe I just don't want to put in all that effort and the work and the discipline that it takes for those artists to work on that scale of project.
Well, I heard it's just you're living in a basement, not doing anything, just staring at a computer for 6 months.
Really?
Yeah, I heard that's what it is. It's just like
I believe it. You got a lot of production to do and not a lot of time.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a lot of people, but it's still, a massive amount of work.
Sorry to cut you
Yeah, I
off.
mean, you got to just kind of churn it out, I guess. But now I kind of think about it, and I think, I think my personality, and maybe this is true for a lot of creative people, but I like this idea of authorship. So an author who writes a book, they don't necessarily collaborate with a committee of people to create this book, right? They sort of go out and live their lives and accumulate a bunch of experiences, and then they sit down and write the book, and that book comes from them, and the book is really about them as a whole person. And I think that's probably where a lot of my creativity is directed. Like, I'm not a big fan of kind of working on a big team of people and kind of talking to a bunch of people all the time and trying to figure things out together.
I really kind of relate to that. I don't know if you know my background or if you've heard our podcast before, but Ryan's a designer and I'm a DJ. And I've worked with bands in the past. I've worked with all sorts of stuff. But as a DJ, I can do my own thing. I don't have any input from a drummer. I don't have any input from a lighting guy or whatever. It's me. I just do me. And if you like it, good. If not, I don't care. So I can see why that kind of pulls you in, just the freedom of doing your own thing and putting out your work versus a team's work of someone saying, do this. I don't care if you like it like that or not, but that's how it needs to be done.
Right.
It's got to be kind of rewarding almost, and just have that freedom as an artist to do whatever you want.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who choose to go freelance probably go freelance because they're generalists, right? Because they enjoy a lot of various aspects about in the whole pipeline of production. And so as a generalist, especially as a young generalist, I think it's very, very difficult for you to fit into an agency that, especially a very established agency, and the more established the agency, the more of a specific pipeline they have, right? I'm going to hire this person to do this, and I'm going to hire that person to do that. It becomes more of a like a factory, right? Where each person gets a smaller and smaller slice of the project, and they see a smaller and smaller slice of the project.
And all of a sudden you're just doing typeface.
Exactly.
Day,
right.
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I think there's people who really enjoy going deeper and deeper and deeper into like one thing. But I think as someone who likes various aspects of the production, then it's very difficult for you to sort of fit into an agency. And I think at the time I saw that, and that in addition with wanting to be the author of a complete work of my own, drove me into doing freelance instead of finding another agency job.
Well, it's so interesting among creative people because there's such a dichotomy in personalities. You got so many folks that are, really introverted and they just sort of want to be creative and work on their own. And you're sort of describing some of those characteristics. And, just in that you would rather kind of be your own team versus working on a team or being a cog in a machine. But then, part of being a freelancer too is you have to go out and scare up business.
Yeah.
You have to be a little bit extroverted because, you're not going to find business just sitting around not talking to anybody. And so it's kind of this balancing act. We're put in positions where all of a sudden sometimes we have to do a little bit more of that outside of the box type, conversation than we might otherwise. And I don't know how your clients come around. I mean, if they come by referral largely, or through friends, or through other people who do work in agency who just pass your name around, or how that works best for you. But it is always interesting to me to see this mix of sort of introversion and extroversion that exists in the same human, because it's really common in freelancers. A lot of us kind of look that way.
Yeah, I think so I'm a big fan of Carl Jung's work, and a big part of what he talks about, what a lot of his work really tries to elaborate on is this idea of people kind of becoming whole, right? And that means to become balanced, right? So if you start off very, very introverted, then there's going to be a whole side to you that is underdeveloped, right? Because you're going to naturally want to be on your own and want to do your own thing and not really collaborate with other people. But hopefully as you get older and as you get more experience, then you're open to developing more of the extroverted side of you. And so, maybe, who knows? I mean, everyone's timeline is different, but, by the time you get to whatever age that you're supposed to get to, you're more of a full person, right? So you're someone who has kind of both of those sides developed. And I think that that's the same thing with people who are very, very extroverted. I think they have more of a hard time kind of trying to be alone. And, I have a friend who said, every time that I'm alone, I just get bored and I just fall asleep. So, and I'm just like, wow, like that's really not my experience at all. But I think it's that kind of development towards something that's very balanced and very whole that makes someone who very, very admirable and someone who you think, wow, they've.
Well, it's so interesting. Yeah, it's I probably ought to look into some of that work too, because that's totally been my experience. As a young designer, I was the guy who I'd sit and crank 18 hours a day behind my computer screen and never lift my head up to talk to anybody. For the longest time as a young freelancer, I had my own office where I just worked by myself in my little office all day. And then at some point I decided I wanted to grow my business and I had to start talking to people. And so I'd do a little talking, or I'd just send out more emails or whatever and kind of work. I
honestly think that you kind of came out of your shell with this podcast.
Well, really, it's just, and that's what I was going to say, is really it's just been in the last couple of years. So we've been doing this show for the last two years and a couple months. And in about that same time frame, I had my last experience at an ad agency where I was laid off, as we all are from ad agencies. And so basically that was my last layoff. And my wife was like, okay, this is crap. Like we're done working at the whim of some agency. This was the third time I'd been laid off by this same agency. So she was like, just done. And she's like, okay, we're done doing that. We can't have like our livelihood and our income and everything sort of strapped to these agencies that kind of ebb and flow. So you're going to have to go out and start your own, you're going to have to make this business work, which was my freelance business that's now evolved more into a business. And so in that time period, this couple years ago, about the same time this show was kicking off, I was going around and meeting every CEO, CMO, C whatever O I could talk to about how to run a business. And what I discovered about myself is that I actually like talking to people way more than I thought I did. And actually now
Getting
sometimes...
him to shut up is the hard part.
Well, and now sometimes it's actually a little bit of trouble now for me to sit down and work behind the computer, because I want to be out helping somebody solve a problem. Like I want to be out and talk to them. I don't even really want to sit behind the computer and design something. We did a website over the weekend. It was this rush job for the lady who just got married on The Bachelor or Bachelor in Paradise or whatever, like last night. And so we had to do a landing page for her and get all this stuff done over the weekend. And like, I'm back to just sitting behind a computer cranking all day. And I'm like, this is stupid. Like, I want to go, meet so-and-so for lunch and let's see what's going on with their business now or whatever. But like, that's a totally different human being than I was just even a couple of years ago. And so it's interesting how quickly we evolve, but it's interesting how you phrased it, or sort of how you put it, as sort of this idea of, I guess, becoming more complete or becoming more full. And that it's not that either one, introversion or extroversion, is right or wrong. It's that they're both parts of the same whole. It just takes different amounts of time to get to, full realization. So
right.
I think that's a really interesting take on that. I love that.
Let's take a pivot here and talk about one of your pieces of work. That Bill Nye video is pretty cool.
Thank you.
Is that your most recent video that you've done, or has that been out for a while? Can you talk about how long that took to make and the process of creating that?
Yeah, that one was actually like a rush job. I mean, I forget how long it was, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And it was a client of mine that I've been working with on and off for, ever since I started freelancing pretty much. And by that time they had known that I like to do a lot of illustration, and that I was working I had worked at a studio that was doing a lot of illustration work that we then kind of ended up animating. And so they came to me and was like, hey, we got this segment with Bill Nye, and it was for, so Al Gore does this 24 hours of climate reality show every single year, where it's like an insane event. Like they get all these celebrities together in this, I guess, a studio in LA. But they have kind of multiple studios around the world, and they do this 24-hour thing where it was broadcast on TV, and for 24 hours, like they would talk to various celebrities and experts and whatnot on climate change. And so one of the segments they got Bill Nye, and so my client was like, as with all clients, they're like, well, we need this in 12 days. And so I was like, oh, sure,
this
okay.
must have been for an agency.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And so I was like, great, let's do it. And so they gave me the footage of Bill Nye. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him, but he was on this nice little piece of green screen. So, I cleaned it up, and I kind of went through the script and did a very rough pass of the storyboards, and just wanted to capture some of the key points that he was talking about. And I had very little kind of creative input from my client, which was really nice, and one of those rare.
It's funny that you say that, because it's come up a few times recently, but having no input and then having some input, at least where they're kind of telling you what they're looking for, that little input helps a lot versus just having a blank canvas and saying, do your thing. That is so daunting, because my thing is crazy, and you don't want to, just having the freedom, but just having them kind of like isolate it and point you in the right direction is key. I think it helps a lot.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why, as creative people, we find it very easy to do client work when it comes in, because it's so bounded, right? It has a specific set of deadlines, it has a budget, and it has creative boundaries. They're going to want this, they want this, and they want the other thing. But we have kind of a hard time with personal projects, because suddenly it's like, no one cares if you finish this, and no one who knows what's going to happen with this, and you have infinite time. And I think as people who are creative, like, we have a lot of difficulty with putting those boundaries on ourselves, because I think on the one hand we feel like, oh, well, I used to do this all the time, where I would be like, oh my God, I'm going to start this personal project and it's going to be like this. And then 2 days later, it would grow to this giant thing, right? Because I'm like, well, I have the opportunity and I can do whatever I want. Why not make it like the best thing ever, grow it exponentially. And then in the end, I would just give up, because I didn't know how to schedule it. I didn't know how to kind of make it happen. And
but having the 12-day deadline and someone saying this has to be done by this time, that kind of lets you just kind of get in flow state and get done.
Right, exactly. Especially, and I think it's like one of those rare projects for me where it was drawing upon things that I was interested in. It was drawing upon a specific expertise that, by that time I was very familiar with, that style and how I was going to animate it technically. So, but, with the challenge of it being such a short timeline, I think it was that perfect mix between the deadlines and the expertise that I had and the creativity I was given. It sort of came together in a really nice way. And so that project, I think, was one of the projects that really flowed very well, because I think sometimes we get projects that we either don't really know how to achieve it technically, or we struggle with a lot of trying to find a stylistic direction for it, and it becomes a much more daunting process. But for that project in particular, it was a very, very smooth sailing, and the client ended up being pretty happy with it. So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, I imagine trying to prepare for this 24-hour TV show probably had some, time constraints and things on their end too, which probably allowed them to be a little bit more objective. And when the work come in, we don't have time for 100 rounds of revision. So if it's most of the way, let's knock it out. So yeah, no, I think it's just funny hearing just all the similarities, personality between the way you're talking and the way that I feel, because I'm notorious for the start things and never do them things. Like, get all these great ideas started. I just carry around lists and lists and lists of ideas that would all be great businesses or great whatevers, and then they just never go anywhere. And then as soon as I'm given a client, like this website I mentioned a minute ago, okay, well, we have 3 days. It has to be done over the weekend. Okay. Done, and it's ready to go, but my own website, to try and get my other startup going, I haven't touched in 6 weeks.
Right. That's how it goes. When I was working for the radio station, same kind of thing. They take all the creativity out of it. They tell you what you have to play, the format. They give you a list of like 20 songs, and every week you're doing the same 20 songs on repeat, and it actually kind of just, it took the fun out of it for me, but I was quick at it. I could go and I could just knock them out because I've used, you get your rotations going through, and then when all you got to do is change 1 or 2 songs when the new rotations come in, and then you've got your 20, 30 songs you have to pick out of.
Yeah.
And it takes all, like I said, it takes all the fun out of it, but it also makes me do my job.
Yeah.
Gets it done quick.
Well, and I think, a lot of designers have like a lot of sort of fallbacks or tricks that they can kind of bust out, when you have to hurry up and make something look nice in a short amount of time. You've built up this breadth of different things you know how to do well quickly. I remember back, and this probably shows my age a little bit, but you remember when Apple was doing everything with like the glossy finish on it. So it all looked like OS X with the glossy whatever. And then all of a sudden everybody wanted glossy everything. And so you learn how to do the glossy look, and then you can just bust out glossy everything. Everything has gloss on it. And so it's funny, but there's those little tricks, right? So then when a client comes in and says, all right, hey, I need this brochure, but I'm going to a trade show Tuesday. I have to have it. Like, can you hurry and bust it out?
Yeah.
You can lean on some of that expertise. And like in the case of this Bill Nye video, I think it says on your website 2 weeks start to finish, but you were able to accomplish that because you'd been doing illustration, been doing animation of said illustration, and that kind of stuff, all to the point where you've become so proficient at it that doing that kind of work is something you could just knock out.
So those assets in there, do you have an asset library that already kind of built out, or is that all hand drawn for that video?
I don't. I'm not a big fan of having like too much of an asset library because I think, I don't know, maybe it's like a pride thing where I'm like, well, no, I need to make everything custom. Everything custom. Yeah, everything has to be handcrafted. And so I ended up drawing all of those things.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's really impressive cool. For 2 weeks.
Yeah, but I wanted to say, like, what you guys were talking about earlier about, developing like a hyper proficiency at something and being prepared to just kind of knock out things. It's interesting because so I kind of developed this framework for my freelance business a little while ago after I'd been doing freelance for the past 4 years full time, because by about, I think, probably my second or third year, I was getting pretty good at the kind of work that I was doing for the kind of clients that I was getting. And I had developed this proficiency at, a certain style or a certain number of styles that I could kind of quickly get done within 3 or 4 weeks, or, sometimes a little bit longer, but generally within that time frame. And a funny thing happened because, like you said, I would get a ton of ideas, but not be able to kind of follow through with any of them. This is like work specifically to do with my personal projects. And I was pretty comfortable. I thought, well, I'm making good money and I have all these clients now, and none of these projects that come in, I really think, oh my God, it's going to be such a challenge. Like it was pretty easy going for a while there. And then I would wake up in the middle of the night, like at 2 or 3 in the morning, just kind of like for no good reason, because everything in my life was fairly stable, and as well as my business. And I couldn't sleep. And I would have this feeling in my body that I was supposed to do something, but I wasn't doing it. And I thought, oh, that's weird. It's odd. And I'm trying to think about like, well, what in my life am I supposed to do, but I'm not doing? I couldn't figure it out. And so for many, many months, I would just kind of have very poor sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and have this feeling that I wasn't doing something I was supposed to be doing. And then one day I thought, okay, well, I want to figure out what the hell this is. And so I sat down and I started kind of writing about, well, what I was feeling and what do I think needs to be changed here. And I began to figure out that it was because I wasn't working on anything that was my own, right? And after a while of doing a lot of freelance work, and with all due respect to all my clients, but it feels like, you're going on these endless Tinder dates. So you're going on these endless dates, and it becomes, even though it's a lot and a lot of variation of projects and clients, but it all becomes like one blob. Like it becomes this one thing, because, when you do similar things over and over and over again, you're really doing one thing over and over and over again. and I couldn't get any of my personal stuff off the ground. I would start them, but then have a very difficult time with them. And then a client project would come in. I'd be like, oh, thank goodness, I don't have to do that anymore.
I don't have to focus on that anymore.
I don't have to focus on that anymore. I can just like focus on this thing that's going to pay me. It's going to be great. And so, but it was like something in my conscience was like, no, like you can't kind of continue down this road. And it was very uncomfortable. It was very, very strange because I didn't want to hear that because it had taken a long time to kind of get this client base, and it had taken a long time to develop this set of styles and the services that I was able to offer my clients and be able to make a living out of it. And so the last thing I wanted to hear was like, well, this isn't enough, right? I have to do something kind of extra. And so I started to take my personal work with more seriousness. And I think in a lot of cases when we fail to kind of stick with a lot of the personal work that we want to do, it puts us kind of in a precarious position in a lot of ways, but certainly as a freelancer, because then you're always going to get hired to just do whatever the client wants you to do, right? They're going to have their particular vision. They're going to have a particular creative brief, and they're going to like, great, you know how to work After Effects. Can you just do it? Can you just make it? And that can work for a very long time, right? Because they'll pay you good money, especially if they're like an ad agency. But after a while, like they're not getting any of your input, and you're not developing your personal creative vision as your own artist. And so that puts you in a dangerous position because there's like 1 billion tutorials out there, and the software are getting more and more powerful and more easy to use. And so people are coming out of school and they're able to do what you do, right?
Yeah.
And so you fail to kind of keep adding value both to yourself and then later to your clients. And so I started to pursue my personal work, and it was really tough because I realized that, well, I didn't know what I wanted to say as an individual artist, and I didn't know how exactly I wanted to say it because I hadn't been saying anything that was my own for such a long time. Like as a kid, drawing the back of that boy's head, it was just like this curiosity, like this stuff that I was getting from the world that I was kind of immediately translating into something that caught me, right? It was something that I was deeply interested in. But then over the years, like you kind of get complacent, and like people are going to pay you money to like work this software or execute that vision, and you're just kind of like, I'll just do that. But by failing to create something that's kind of meaningful to you, I think it's very scary because it's sort of like you're in this pond, and then you're not allowing any more oxygen to come in, right? And so the things in the pond kind of start to die. And being very dramatic here.
No, it's great.
No.
It's a perfect outlet.
Yeah, but that's kind of the way that I was feeling. And so I thought, okay, like, let me just start with a couple of smaller personal projects that I could, finish. And so I took an illustration course, and the course instructor, his name is Sterling Hundley, he encouraged us to kind of go back to like physical material, use inks, use watercolor, use paper, use pens. And that was it was great for me because I really realized that I missed those tools because everything is so digital now. Like I can do a bunch of work in 8 hours worth of work, and then I switch off the computer and it's like, I haven't done it. Like, what did I do today? Who knows?
A bunch of zeros and ones.
Exactly. A bunch of pixels. Yeah. And so it was very refreshing to kind of come back to the physical relationship with the tools and the craft that I had, spent all my life kind of familiarizing myself with. And so I started doing some smaller projects, and as soon as I started doing that, like within, I would say a few weeks, I could sleep again. It was weird. It was like very, very strange. Like it was something in my brain was like, oh, phew, like
good, you're doing it.
She's doing it. Yeah, she's doing it. It's okay. And I could sleep again. And as a result, I kind of cut back on some of my client work, and I took my personal work kind of a lot more seriously. And by extension, I think I took my my personal interests with a lot more seriousness. And that's something that I've written a course about, freelancing, and that's something I really hit on, because I think it's a strange thing, but it's like a lot of creative people, either they're like ashamed of what they're actually interested in, or they're afraid of putting out there what exactly they're actually interested in, right? Instead of just drawing things or sketching things and putting it out there because it'll get you likes, or it looks trendy, or it fits the current illustration or animation trends, instead of putting out something that they're actually interested in. And I think that kind of accumulates, every time you create something, but you're like, well, no one, it's too weird, like it's too weird for me to draw this, or it's too weird for me to design this. I better, I'd rather do something that's a little more kind of acceptable. Every time you do that, I think you kind of throw away your particular path, right? You kind of throw away what would have formed your individual path forward in the creative field. And I think a good way to think about this is that if you think about the particular artists that you admire, whether that be a photographer or painter or animator or illustrator or whatever it is, the people who you really admire and that stick with you and that last for a long time are people who have a specific vision, right? They have a set of ideas and they have a set of interests that they love and are obsessed about, and they spend their whole life kind of trying to explore and get deeper in. And I think that could be true for any person who is creative and wants to, work in the creative industry, but also to explore kind of who they are as artists. And I think it becomes more and more important, like the further along the freelance path, or the further along your life, I guess, that you are, because there's something, and I think that was the kind of thing that wouldn't let me sleep, is like something within you is saying, well, there's something that you're supposed to say as a creative person, and there's something that you're supposed to express as a creative person. So you need to take that seriously and kind of express that. And, once you do that, I think that also then feeds back into your client work, because as I started exploring more of my personal projects, the clients who came to me, I was able to offer them more original ideas and ideas that I've been actually excited about and thinking about for a long time. And that then they were excited by those ideas. And so that gives them the opportunity to come to you when they want your input, or when they want your particular style or your particular viewpoint, right? And I think, even if you look on Instagram and your favorite artists on Instagram, and, the artists who seem to be getting all these incredible opportunities, it's because they have that like a very, very strong voice or a very strong perspective that they have that people are interested in. And that's why clients kind of find them.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was going to say that, in bands, it's kind of similar. Like you can have the boy band, you can have the pop band, or whatever's trending or going to do well on the radio, or you can have the Vendetta Reds, the Zach Davidson we had on the show. Ryan was talking to him, and he's like, the relationship that they develop with their fans, and they might not be charting on the radio, but they have fans that come out to see them specifically for the style and the genre that they do, and developing that fan base and building it up from there.
That's the thing. I mean, the best examples of those guys are dudes like Fish, these like jam band guys. That nobody nowadays, I mean, they're not like, appealing to a ton of millennials or anything, but they're like the second or third most like band that makes the most money every year out of anybody.
Yeah.
Like that's, not Taylor Swift, not anybody else is beating Fish.
It's because they developed
and
their own brand.
And it's because they spent the last 40 years doing their own thing, and they built a community around that.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's really beautiful what you're saying, all this stuff about, sort of actually, I'm actually super, like, sort of secretly jealous because, you're probably not even out of your 20s yet, and you're sort of landing on these life experiences that, like, I'm starting to get into these at almost 40.
We're dudes. We don't pay attention.
Yeah, we just don't pay attention. Well, the thing is, I've been freelancing. I've been doing other people's bidding, and it pays well. Yeah. And so I've built a nice little career out of this thing for the last 20 years. And more lately, and actually part of it is sort of being spun off by the fact that buying real art is expensive. But I've had this thing that I felt like I needed to be surrounded by more like real art instead of, prints and posters and things like that. But like things that actual people created and put their vision into. And my original fantasy, we just bought this house, and the original plan was fill it with, art from real artists. And, unfortunately my checkbook doesn't allow for that. But it has brought back out of me this idea of doing some painting. I used to paint when I was a little kid, like, 12, 13, 14 years old. I had a grandmother who painted, and she taught me how to do it when I was really young. And I've not picked up a brush in 25 years.
He did the chicken out of his hand. He traced
Yeah,
it.
it's an awesome chicken. But I've been thinking more and more about getting back into painting, and I think it is exactly, and I actually do a lot of writing on this. Writing is one thing that I did start doing more of as a way to try and reconnect or start to communicate and share a little bit of a vision. And one of the things that I've been writing on a lot is this drive for sort of tangible and real life experiences again. And you articulated it much more succinctly than I have. Mine are in meandery, 10-hour long paragraphs and things like that. But the premise is the same. It's this idea that, living in this digital world, and I'm older than you, but I was there for the beginning of all this digital stuff, and so I spend a lot of time. I mean, as soon as that became the thing, I was leading the charge in that thing. I gave up immediately on my pencils and my sketchbooks and all that stuff, and I used to carry a sketchbook with me everywhere I go. And I haven't even sat down and drawn anything. In fact, I was just doodling while you were talking, and I doodled this little skull thing.
Hey,
and that's
nice.
the first thing I've drawn in months. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, but it's just hearing you talk about that and sort of this idea of reconnecting with tools and reconnecting with self and trying to, develop these tangible relationships with things and expressing something from inside. I mean, you're totally right. You just don't get that doing client work. You just don't, because you're busy handling their objectives and what they want to do versus what your head is telling you to do. And so it's funny because I also haven't been sleeping super well lately, which is weird for me.
You waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning with this
I'm tossing
thought in your head.
A lot. And so, but that's never been a problem for me. My whole life has never been a problem.
Right.
I've always slept like a rock, and probably because I work a lot of hours and I'm always busy late and stuff. And so I just, I sleep pretty well. But this has been going on for a while, but I don't think it's probably any coincidence that you sort of express that similar kind of thing, and that in your mind that was connected back to these hand skills and the things you used to do when you were young in terms of being able to draw and go out and express, a vision or a take on life that way. And, and in my situation, same sort of sleep scenario. And then I'm also, now all of a sudden kind of craving this idea of, I just need to go buy some paint, go buy some whatever, and just but it's stuff that I haven't even thought about doing in 10 years, and then when I do think about it, it's just here and there, and I've never actually executed. So the idea of running out and doing some personal project is super appealing right now.
Now you've got a garage space and a place to do it all.
Yeah, well, now it's much more doable. It's like I grew into the opportunity to be able to do it. And so, but no, so it's really interesting to hear that parallel because, and I think you put it in a really nice way. So, but speaking of that framework, so now is that the framework that you sell or you offer as a course?
Yeah. So, after a while of doing freelance, I started to notice, one of the things I started to notice was I had done freelance in kind of a weird way, as I do so many things.
You got your own style, your own path.
Yeah. Creativity. But so I had, when I started freelancing, I, similarly to you, it was very much behind the computer, I just wanted to do my thing. But I think one of the reasons I also pushed myself to do freelance was because I knew that I couldn't stay behind the computer forever, right? And I couldn't just kind of hide behind something forever. And freelance seemed to me to be a way to have to get me out there. And so I think now maybe it's a little bit worse, but there's such an emphasis right now on if you're a creative person, you have to be on social media. You have to sign up for all of these portfolio sites like Behance and Dribble and whatnot, and you have to be known and you have to kind of get famous before you can get a steady supply of clients and steady supply of projects. And I was fortunate because the studio that I was working at the time, like we didn't really have much of a marketing or a sales department. It was just kind of, they had like some good SEO on their site, but they didn't have like a social media presence. And I thought, well, they were getting projects kind of left and right. Like maybe it could be true that a person who's a creative person who wanted to freelance didn't necessarily have to kind of build a social media following before they could get steady work and make a living.
Do you think a lot of their work came from those YouTube videos that they were putting out, the hand sketches? Do you think that
they didn't? I mean, I think it was because the founder of the studio was he caught this phenomenon like very, very, very early. He had a client who wanted this particular style of video, and he thought, oh, great, like I'm just going to register this name. And so he registered the keywords that kind of then blew up. And I think that's where a lot of his traffic was coming from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Sorry
when I
derail you there.
That's right. So when I started to freelance, I thought, well, maybe I don't have to concentrate on building this social media following. And it wasn't something that I could tell that I was great at, because I was never really that good that active on Facebook or active on Instagram. And I thought, well, that's probably not somewhere that I'm going to excel at. And so I spent a long time building an introductory video and building a website to house my work and house that video on. And I spent a good like 3 or 4 months before I quit my job to do that. And once I did, what I just did was I would find all the studios in New York City, all the agencies in New York City, and I just cold emailed them. I just blasted it out. And
that sounds very familiar, Ryan.
Yeah, right. And I think it's kind of like this, I don't know, like a forgotten art or something. Like I think people who are getting into freelance, the biggest question is, well, how do I get clients? How do I get clients? But I kind of think it's not the right question necessarily. And that's why I kind of built this framework. And like at the top is basically like this iceberg, and at the top is getting clients, because I think obviously it's important, and you have to make that contact with clients before you can get
your client too soon, and you're not developed as a designer, or you're not developed in your career, and you don't have that bottom structure that you're talking about,
right?
You're doing a disservice to the client.
Well, and it is interesting too, because I mean, you make a good point that I think the sort of the allure of things like social media, like Instagram and platforms like that is, and maybe it's just like, it's a mix of the allure of social media plus narcissism, but we sort of all think that people are going to seek us out. They saw this cool thing I did, and now they're going to come for me. So right. I think especially a lot of young designers and people sort of in creative trades sort of become victims of that, where they go, oh, okay, well, I don't have to go out and actively tell somebody I would like their business. Like, they'll just come to me. They'll see what I've done, right, and let's see how cool it is. And then they'll go, okay. And maybe that happens sometimes, but like, that's definitely not how the lion's share of work gets passed around.
Right. Or maybe that there's something unsavory about, having to market yourself or having to kind of put your work out there and like in front of people.
Yeah. Well, and it's a risk, right? I mean, if you actively go seeking out an agency, you're taking a risk. You're putting yourself out there, and you're going out in front of them and saying, hey, geez, I hope you like what I've done. I'd be really interested in working with you. And you're vulnerable. Where if you're on social media, you have complete control over what everybody sees. You have complete control over all this stuff. And so you're putting out this message that is very safe for you, Right. And so, but that doesn't really communicate to an agency owner or whatever. And they might pick you because they like your style or whatever, I mean, there's definitely situations where you might go to Instagram to try and discover a designer or an artist or something. But the guys who are really good and the people who make freelance a career versus the people who are freelancing because they're between jobs are, the ones that do what you do. They go out and they're not afraid to take that risk. And you may not like me. Maybe my style doesn't jive with what you want, and that's okay. But I'm going to tell you what I have, and if you like it, cool. And if not, then take it to the next guy. That's okay. And so I think that idea of going out and actively looking for clients is the thing that, I mean, it's the most common sense thing in the world, but I think it's what young freelancers miss a lot, is you have to go ask for the work. You can't just stand around and wait for it to come to you.
Right, right. And I think it's like this, there's a lot of education around improving your technical skills, right? So you can always take a course in how to animate better and how to draw better and how to do this better and that better. But in some ways, a lot of these technical courses are also safe, right? It's sort of like going back to school, and there's going to be someone who looks over your work and tells you, this is great and this is how you can improve. And I think that technical improvement kind of needs to be a part of how you grow as an artist and as a freelancer. But I think a huge part of freelancing is not really, there's technical, but I think once you reach a certain threshold where you reach like a professional level, then more technical skills doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be picked out of a bunch of people.
It's interesting. There's a university here locally, and I'll try and keep this short because we got to wrap up with you here in the next few minutes. But there's an agency here or a university here that their art department, their marketing and advertising department is basically run like a miniature agency. So
Yes.
so inside inside this quote unquote agency, everybody are given titles and everybody's giving whatever, just like you would in a real agency. And the premise is that you're learning what agency life is all about. So you get a title as an art director, or a copywriter, or an account manager, or whatever, and you perform your job basically while you're going to school. And so, but what happens is I get called in every now and then for these portfolio reviews, and these guys come out and they all introduce themselves to me as creative director, which for anybody who in the agency business knows that it takes a minute to become a creative director. You don't just get to bestow that title on yourself usually, or at least not in a way that anybody will take you seriously. You can call yourself whatever you want, but if you want to be treated like a creative director, you have to have something under your wings. You're not generally a student. And but they come up, they introduce themselves. Oh, I'm so and so. I'm senior creative director over at this university's advertising program. And then they give you work that looks very much like a sophomore in college's work or whatever. It's really bad. And then when they go out of college and they graduate and they show up at the agencies and their experience as creative director at this school, then you try and hire them as an entry level whatever at $15 an hour because they don't really know how to do anything. They're all crushed. And so many of them end up leaving the program or leaving whatever because or just never end up taking a job because they can't get a job that pays what they think they're worth. And so it's so funny, this sort of mental game that we're playing, so it is a balance of technical skills, but it's more than that. It's like, to your point, you stepped into your job at this other agency and learned on the fly how to do the work, right? You're not going to be able to step into every job and immediately know how to just do what you need to do. So being able to be taught is a big part of it. But when you already see yourself as a creative director, that's sort of acting like you've already hit the top. And so there's not that much left to learn. And so it's like it creates this weird mindset among these kids that I think makes it really hard for them to approach these jobs with humility and come in and be willing to recognize, I'm not the best technician, but I'm willing to overcome that or get better at something. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. So your story just kind of made me think of that. So
yeah.
Anyways, thank you for making the time to come on our show today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Benny, tell people, a little bit more about like where they can find you online if they want to get in touch, if they're interested in seeing some of your work, since maybe you're not on Instagram. Also just mention your program real fast, the Unconventional Freelancer. Is that what it's called? And just kind of, where can people go learn more about that? Because I think, based on the things we're talking about, you've solved all the life problems like at 26 or whatever you are. So like you're going to be smooth sailing for the next 30 years. I don't know what your problems are going to be, but they're going to have to be profound because like the crap I'm going through now, you just solved. So I'm feeling way behind the curve. But I guess the good news is things never get that bad for me.
That's true. That's true.
But anyway, where can people find you, learn more about you, and learn about your program?
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for having me on this podcast. This is a very enjoyable first podcast experience, and it's given me a lot of confidence and faith in the podcast community. So my commercial work you can find at beii.tv, so bay.tv, and that has all of my, well, not all of it, but some select client work that I really enjoyed working on. You can also find my course, and I do consultations as well with people who are either looking to freelance, and people being illustrators, motion designers, or generally people in the creative industry. So they can find they can find that work at unconventionalfreelancer.com. And I also recently started a personal blog where I write about a lot of these case studies based on my personal projects, as well as some of my client work that I enjoyed, called badanimals.net. It took me a long time to figure out that name. I thought, sounds pretty cool.
Very cool. Well, yeah. No, so we'll include all those in the show notes so people can track up or catch up with you. Everybody, check out Benni's work. It's a lot of fun. She's got a lot of great stuff. I'm interested to read your blog now, so I'm going to have to check that out right away. And then
and one more thing.
Oh, sure.
One more thing. So I'm giving a talk at BNH in New York City at the end of October. So that's free, and it's going to be live streamed as well. So if you're interested, I will also send you guys a link to that.
Yeah, please do. And then hit us up again right before it, and we'll do a little talking about it on the previous episode. Whatever comes out the week before that, we'll talk about it.
Great.
So that we can give you a little extra love. So cool. Well, thanks so much, Benni. Appreciate your time, and thanks for dealing with our technological snafus at the beginning of the episode. So we appreciate your patience and glad we were able to make it work.
Oh, good.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
No problem. Have a great day.